accounting for costs and expenses. Why our cost accounting system doesn't have to be complicated. An efficient system can still be simple and easy to maintain. The sooner information is available, the more useful it is. And information is available quickly if your procedure is simple and as automatic as possible. This chapter shows you how to use your books and records to allocate costs and expenses to jobs. A system that doesn't permit prompt analysis won't be worth the trouble it takes to maintain. But one that reveals vital information about a job's profits and losses, cash flow, and use of material and labor will save you money. Analyzing labor productivity is essential to controlling costs and making accurate estimates. It helps you spot lost time and make required corrections while the job is still in progress. Controlling labor costs is probably your most challenging control problem. There are two areas of labor control to consider: your office, sales, and supervisory force, and your construction crews. Idle time increases labor costs and reduces profits by the same amount. If you have to include idle time in your estimates, you become less competitive. Controlling labor costs should be among the top priorities of every cost-conscious builder. Your bookkeeping records can tell you as much about productivity on your jobs as a professional labor cost analyst can, and at a much lower cost. The only way to analyze labor hours is by the job. A total picture is important in its own way, of course. But only detailed analysis of each part of every job will help you understand your true labor requirements. Your first step is to design a good way to collect costs on your jobs and assign those costs to specific projects. Once you know what your true costs are, you can compute and compare gross profits, selling profits, and net profits. While you can identify direct labor costs by job, that's not true of office, selling, and overhead expenses. You need to find some reasonable way to assign these expenses to each of your jobs. Your assignment method won't be perfect, no matter how logical it is. There's no foolproof way to make absolutely sure each job carries its fair share of overhead. You can only be as consistent as possible, realizing that the best estimate of true costs and expenses is better than no cost system at all. The usual method is to assign a percentage of fixed overhead expenses to each job. For the purpose of analysis, there isn't much value in trying to study fixed overhead in connection with sales and costs. There simply isn't a connection. So while you might assign an overhead factor as part of your billing to a customer, the analytical part has to be confined to direct costs as they relate to sales. We'll discuss specific ways to apply overhead expenses to your jobs in a reasonable and efficient way later in this chapter. But first, let's look at the procedure for accounting for your direct labor. In the following examples, we'll use a pegboard system. Although pegboard is less common today than the more efficient automated systems, these examples make the procedures convenient and visual. So, even if you don't use a pegboard, this will assist you in understanding how the basic procedures work in any system, including an automated system. Accounting for direct labor. The goal of labor cost analysis is to find the actual cost to complete each part of every project. Most jobs with high labor costs have inefficient work schedules that result in excessive idle time. Jobs run with a large crew and only one foreman costs more to complete. Invariably, several workers will be idle for a substantial part of the time. Jobs that use only a few workers and one foreman usually have a higher productivity rate, especially if the crew includes a highly skilled worker, one lower wage apprentice, and one laborer. Small crews with a good mix of skill and pay levels are usually most productive. The payroll register is the best place to do a weekly labor cost analysis. Post and analyze labor costs as soon as you complete the week's payroll. That way, you have the cost information available right away. Let's assume you'll write and record payroll checks on the left side of a pegboard check register. The register shows the date, name, hourly rate, total hours, gross pay, deductions, and net pay. The right side of the register is available for cost analysis. Remember that we're using the pegboard only as an example. It's more likely that you'll be keying entries into an automated accounting system. The pegboard just helps you see what's involved in the analysis. Use your time card. Your first step is to break down the hours by job, or by task within jobs, depending on the detail you need. This isn't difficult if you have a properly designed time card. Include a task breakdown by job on the time card for each worker, each crew member, under supervision of the supervisor or crew leader, notes the time spent on each major task. The time can be rounded to the nearest half hour, but every hour of the workday should be accounted for and noted on the card at the end of each day. Once your workers are accustomed to this procedure, it should take only a minute or two to record each day's work. The next step is for someone in your office to convert the hourly breakdown to labor cost dollars. Convert each worker's hours individually, because varying wage rates result in varying costs. Figure 16%-1 shows the right-hand side of the payroll register. Here, the gross wages are broken down by task or job number. The employee on the first line, for example, has divided his hours for the week between 3 jobs. Number 437P shows 24 hours of work and a payroll total of 252. Include only your payroll cost, not your tax, insurance, and overhead costs. You'll add those later. The column for task number, 437P, might be used to collect all costs for framing a roof on a particular job. The column numbered 432R might cover other rough carpentry on the same job or a different job. With a little ingenuity, you can create job and task categories that correspond to the type of work you do. Make the list of accounting categories available to your crews so they can record their time properly. Post the list where the crews check out at the end of each day. That way they can record their hours by code number rather than by description. But be sure to have a supervisor review the time cards for accuracy. This saves time both for the workers and for the bookkeeper who posts your analysis worksheet. Figure 16-1 analysis of payroll costs by job. It's easier to record and post direct labor hours if you're consistent in your task number assignments. For example, in Figure 16-1, the column 437P might be task 437 on a job that has been assigned the letter. P-task 437 is always roof framing, regardless of the job number. All labor and material costs on job P would be posted to an account with the P. If you have more than 26 jobs underway during a year, or if your crews do more than 999 categories of work, use a longer combination of numbers and letters. You'll need some numbered categories to record idle time, driving time, cleanup and maintenance time, and other time that can't be charged to a particular job. Allocate these hours among your jobs with other overhead expenses. Be sure your numbering system is well defined so your workers have no doubt about what number to use to record their hours. Use the same numbering system for material costs as you do for labor hours. In Figure 16-1, labor cost for roof framing is recorded under job 437P. Use the same number to post the materials for that same task and job on a separate material cost worksheet. Naturally, some of the lumber ordered for roof framing may be used somewhere else in the job, but your estimate of the materials required will probably be fairly close to the actual amount used. If the job requires more lumber than you estimated, find out where the loss occurred or where your estimate was wrong. Then assign the additional cost to the appropriate category. If you have more than a few jobs underway at a time and more than 10 or 15 work categories, your payroll register probably won't have enough columns to record all your crew hours. Instead, use any standard ruled pad with vertical columns. Keep the completed sheets in a loose leaf binder. They become important cost records that you'll use many times when estimating new jobs. At the end of a year, you'll have a record of several hundred worker hours under a number of categories. A quick tally of the number of square feet of roof framing this represents will tell you the average hours required for every 1,000 square feet of roof your crew's framed. Or here's a way that's even better and easier. Divide the roof framing hours by the board feet of lumber you use for roof framing. That gives you the average worker hours required per 1,000 board feet of lumber. Of course, some jobs take more time per 1,000 board feet, and others take less. There are many factors that affect productivity, but you should be able to tell in advance which jobs will be harder or easier than your average and approximately how much harder or easier they will be. Note in Figure 16%-1 that 46 of the 110 job hours for job 432 were worked by employees earning $7.75 per hour. The balance, 64 hours, were at a rate of mix of hourly rates ranging up to 10 per hour. Keep this average hourly cost in mind when comparing different jobs. The average hourly cost in Figure 16 per hour. This is an important consideration. Some projects require the constant presence of a supervisor, while others may not. Some projects require a higher ratio of skilled workers. You may sub out most of your specialized work, but even so, your cost per labor hour will vary widely between jobs. While the special needs of each job will vary, you should determine whether the average hourly labor cost is reasonable on each of your jobs. If a rate varies considerably from week to week or remains at a high level, you need to investigate. It could indicate that there's too much supervision or too many highly paid workers on the job. The direct labor analysis shown in Figure 16%-1 is practical because it provides valuable information with a minimum amount of work. The information is available right away in a format that's easy to understand. You can see the components of the average hourly rate in detail, but each employee's time for the week is listed on one line. This kind of analysis establishes clear trends for each job. Most important, it provides invaluable information for use in future estimates, accounting for materials and subcontracts. Since payments for materials and subcontracts are readily identified by project, you can record job cost information at the same time you pay the bills. Or, in an accrual system, you can break down by job at the time bills are accrued. In a fully automated accounting system, a single entry to record accrual or payment of a direct cost can accomplish everything you need: records for journal entries, checks, and job cost analysis. To assign a direct cost to the proper job, it's necessary to include that with your entry. You can do this in several ways, depending on the design of your system. Some systems are set up to use a numerical assignment for each job. You identify costs for that job by the specific job number. In other systems, the entire coding system is alphabetical, so you can make your job cost assignment using the job name. You can maximize the advantage of automated accounting procedures if you generate several useful reports from a single entry to the system. In the case of recording materials and subcontractor payments, a single entry provides journal and ledger entries in your general accounting system. Identification by job for the job cost routine, accounts payable or check writing, and other reports you might need, such as cash flow analysis and scheduling. If you don't use a computer in your operation, you'll need to duplicate your reporting from a single piece of information. This may require the creation of several different records. If you use numerical coding for this purpose, remember that the efficiency of numerical coding is only as good as your consistency in assigning the codes to each of these records. If you make mistakes, those mistakes carry through to the subsidiary records, and the more mistakes, the less reliable and useful the whole system becomes. So quality control is essential in all systems, whether automated or manual. Let's see how this works using a pegboard system. In a pegboard system, you record costs for materials and subcontract work when you pay the bills. The accounts payable or check writing record requires a second entry to assign the entry to a specific job. The left side entries have to balance with the right side. The sum of all right side entries should also be recorded on job cost cards. We'll cover this in more detail later in this chapter. Distribution of overhead expenses. Not included in total: idle time, sick leave, vacation, and shop time. Figure 16-2 distribution of overhead expenses. Accounting for overhead. You can't assign overhead to specific jobs the way you can payroll and materials. For this reason, you need some other reasonable basis to allocate these costs. Finding a good, uniform way to assign overhead isn't easy. It can't be based only on income, because income from jobs varies with various phases of completion. In the meantime, overhead is a constant and recurring part of that job's cost. Material purchases vary as well, not only by the phase of completion, but by the type of job. The only reasonable way to assign overhead is in proportion to total direct labor hours. This can be justified by these factors. The percentage of hours spent on any one job represents the degree of commitment to the project or the emphasis placed on it. A management's involvement with a job usually varies directly with the labor hours. As labor hours increase, there's usually a corresponding increase in the need for controls, supervision, and planning. Several large overhead expenses vary with labor hours: union welfare, payroll taxes, use of trucks and autos, and insurance. And no other method of allocation comes as close to truly representing a fair distribution of overhead expenses as does relating them to total labor hours. There are several ways to assign overhead expenses to jobs on the basis of direct labor hours. Remember, you probably have 20 or more overhead expense accounts. In fact, you probably have more overhead expense accounts in your general ledger than all other expense types put together. It would be too time-consuming to assign a portion of each expense account to each job. It would be meaningless as well. A detailed breakdown would take hours to complete. Fortunately, there's an easier way. Assignment of overhead is a guess at best. A detailed distribution would have little or no value. The practical and efficient solution is to use the total of your overhead expenses each month. This is illustrated in Figure 16%-2. Your overhead expense total is available at the end of each month when you post your books. Figure 16-2 shows total hours listed on the first line, including 36 hours of time not related directly to jobs. This 36 hours isn't allocated. All you're concerned with on this worksheet is the direct labor by job. You'll use a formula to allocate costs, other than. Check register. Figure 16%-3 typical pegboard system with job cost ledger. Direct labor on specific jobs among all the jobs. The second line shows the percentage of hours by job classification. Apply these percentages to total selling and overhead expense to find the additional cost each project should carry. Once you've done this, you can assign selling and overhead expense to individual jobs and record them on the job cost ledger cards. Job cost ledger cards. Accounting for the costs and expenses of several jobs at once can be a burden, especially if it involves going over all entries twice, once for the general ledger and once for cost analysis. Figure 16-3 diagrams a typical pegboard system for checks. The distribution to accounts for all payments occurs between the check and the middle of the board. The job cost ledger card is placed on the far right. In this position, the check amount is entered again, providing complete cost analysis. This method is intended to ensure that all costs are entered on a job. Cost ledger. For that reason, you need to use at least one card for each job. You'll need a card for all other expenses as well. This would include miscellaneous expenses, one-time work, and any job categories that aren't accounted for separately. In the pegboard writing method, the total of all columns posted to all the currently active job cost ledger cards should equal all columns for distribution to the general ledger. The total of all checks will then balance to the distribution columns and also to the cost control columns. Materials and subcontract payments are posted directly to the job cost ledger as you write checks to pay bills, but not payroll and expenses. Figure 16-4 shows how to post the payroll and expense totals. You can post the labor totals weekly and expense totals once a month. If you keep cost records like these, you'll have accounted for all your costs and expenses on a cost center basis. That gives you a tidy and comprehensive. Figure 16-4 posting payroll and expenses to the job cost ledger. Summary of business. The complete system is easily maintained, requires a minimum of calculation, and handles assignment of indirect expenses in a logical manner. You can see total monthly and project-to-date costs and expenses on the job cost ledger cards. The total system is practical and provides useful information with little added effort. Accounting for completed contract expenses. Accounting for general expenses on jobs accounted for under the completed contract method presents other problems. All costs and expenses are deferred, and general expenses assigned to completed contract projects should be treated the same way. But how do you defer specific expenses when allocations are done in total? It would be very time-consuming and meaningless to defer a percentage of each expense account. That process would obscure any analysis of overhead costs, making it impossible to control selling expense and fixed overhead. You'd have too many accounting entries to record in each account. But as we've seen, you can estimate selling expense and fixed expenses in total. So the answer is to estimate deferrals the same way. Each broad section of expense in the general ledger can include a special account for deferral of expenses on projects kept under the completed contract method. Control these accounts with great care and always know what makes up the balance. Divide each month's expenses between projects. The completed contract totals are deferred by the following entry for jobs kept under the completed contract method. These expense account reductions continue through the life of each project, reducing the selling expenses total each month. Fixed overhead entries would be as follows. These, like the selling expenses, continue through the life of the job. When these projects are completed, all income, costs, and expenses are recognized at the same time. The job cost ledger has been accumulating the totals for each account. The entry to recognize the completed contract account is, by this entry, all deferrals are reversed and the income, costs, expenses, and profit or loss are recorded on completion of the job. If you have no uncompleted work accounted for by the completed contract method, the balance of the following accounts would be zero. You can put together a complete income statement at any time using the job cost ledger system. Even for completed contract accounts, all profit and loss information for each job is readily available in one place. If you use these controls, you can proceed with confidence, knowing that all costs and expenses have been assigned and there will be no surprises at the end of the job. The advantage of the job cost system is that completed contract accounts, which are actually not included in profit and loss, can be analyzed apart from the general ledger.